Grey Hollow was a town shrouded in perpetual twilight. The fog hung low, creeping through the cobblestone streets like a ghostly veil. Trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled. The air was thick with an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. Whispers of fear echoed in hushed conversations, tales of a dark presence lurking in the night. Rumors spoke of a cat, black as midnight, with eyes that glowed like embers. The town was gripped in a vice of fear, waiting for the next victim to fall. Disappearances in Grey Hollow were not new, but they had become more frequent. Every week another person vanished, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a sense of dread. Ella had heard the stories all her life, but she never truly believed them. That changed when her best friend Clara vanished without a trace. Ella's fear for her sister Sophie grew with each passing day. She noticed how shadows seemed to linger around their house, its glowing eyes watching from the darkness. Ella's nights were restless, haunted by nightmares of shadow. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of its growl still ringing in her ears. She took to watching over Sophie as she slept, a silent guardian in the night. Ella tried to confide in her parents, but they dismissed her fears as childish fantasies. Determined to protect Sophie, Ella began to research the legends of Shadow. Her determination grew with each passing day, fueled by the love for her sister and the fear of losing her. Shadow's presence was an ever-looming threat. It moved through the town like a phantom, seen only in fleeting glimpses and half-remembered dreams. Ella felt its presence more acutely than ever. Sophie, blissfully unaware of the danger, continued to play and laugh, her innocence a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. Ella knew it was only a matter of time before it made its move. Ella knew she couldn't wait for Shadow to strike. The creature had already taken too much from her, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing Sophie too. She had to take the fight to the creature before it could harm Sophie. The thought of her little sister in danger fueled her determination. Desperation drove her to hatch a plan, a risky and dangerous plan that was her only hope. She spent countless hours in the dimly lit room, mapping out every possible scenario, every potential outcome. She found an old rusted knife in the attic, a relic of a time long past. It was a symbol of her family's history, a weapon that had seen many battles. She spent days preparing, sharpening the blade and practicing in secret. Each stroke of the whetstone was a promise to herself, a vow to protect her sister at all costs. Her resolve hardened with each passing moment. She knew the risks, but the thought of failure was unbearable. She couldn't afford to fail. The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her, but she stood firm, her mind focused and clear. Ella's parents remained oblivious, wrapped up in their own fears and grief. They had no idea of the burden their daughter was carrying, the lengths she was willing to go to protect her family. The night of the confrontation arrived, and Ella's nerves were stretched to their breaking point. The air was thick with tension. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the silence. She clutched the knife tightly, its weight a small comfort in the face of the unknown. The cold metal against her skin was a reminder of the reality she was about to face. For Sophie, she would face the darkness head-on. With a deep breath, she stepped into the unknown, her heart pounding but her spirit unyielding. She was ready to confront the creature, to fight for her sister's safety no matter the cost. The house was eerily silent as Ella crept through the darkened halls. The only sound was the soft creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet, each step a reminder of the age and history of the house. The walls seemed to close in on her, the darkness almost tangible, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. It was as if her body was trying to warn her of the impending danger, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, making her hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. She moved with purpose, every step bringing her closer to the confrontation she dreaded. Her mind raced with thoughts of what was to come, the fear of the unknown gnawing at her resolve, yet she knew she had no choice but to face it, to protect those she loved. She found Sophie asleep in her bed, her face peaceful and untroubled. The sight of her daughter brought a momentary sense of calm to Ella's racing heart. She watched the gentle rise and fall of Sophie's chest, the innocence of her slumber a stark contrast to the turmoil Ella felt inside. Ella's heart ached with love and fear. The love for her daughter was a fierce, protective force, but the fear of what lurked in the shadows threatened to overwhelm her. She knew she had to be strong for Sophie's sake. She took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was to come. The air was thick with tension, each breath a struggle as she tried to calm her nerves. She couldn't afford to falter now, not when so much was at stake. The air grew cold and a sense of dread settled over the room. It was as if the very atmosphere had changed, the temperature dropping suddenly, sending a shiver down her spine. The cold seemed to seep into her bones, making her feel even more vulnerable. Ella knew Shadow was near. She could feel its presence, a dark, malevolent force that seemed to watch her from the shadows. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she stood her ground. She could feel its dark presence, a tangible weight pressing down on her. It was as if the very air around her had become heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a sinister energy that threatened to consume her. The shadows in the room seemed to grow deeper, darker, as if the very essence of the night was converging around her. The darkness was almost alive, shifting and moving, creating shapes that seemed to reach out towards her. It was a living nightmare, and she was trapped in its grip. And then, with a suddenness that took her breath away, Shadow struck. It was a blur of movement, a dark shape that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, its attacks swift and merciless. Ella barely had time to react, her body moving on instinct as she fought to protect herself and her daughter from the malevolent force that sought to destroy them. Shadow's attack was swift and brutal. It moved like a living shadow, a blur of darkness that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Ella barely had time to react. She raised the knife, but Shadow was faster. Its claws raked across her arm, leaving a trail of burning pain. Ella stumbled back, her vision swimming with tears. Shadow loomed over her, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. But she couldn't give up, not when Sophie was in danger. With a cry of defiance, Ella lunged at Shadow, the knife flashing in the dim light. She struck out wildly, her fear and desperation giving her strength. The blade connected, and Shadow let out a hiss of anger. Ella's strength was waning. Each breath felt like a battle, each step a monumental effort. The weight of her exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders, making it hard to even lift her head. The fight had taken its toll, and she could feel her energy draining away. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but she knew she couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Shadow's presence was overwhelming, a dark tide that threatened to pull her under. It loomed over her, a constant reminder of the danger she faced. The air around her felt thick, suffocating, as if the darkness itself was alive and pressing in on her. She fought on, driven by sheer willpower and love for Sophie. Memories of their time together flashed through her mind, giving her the strength to push forward. She couldn't let the shadow win, not when Sophie was counting on her. But she knew she couldn't hold out much longer. Her body was reaching its limit, and the pain was becoming unbearable. Desperation clawed at her heart, but she refused to let it take over. Shadow's claws raked across her again, and Ella cried out in pain. The searing agony tore through her, making her vision blur with tears. She could feel the warmth of her own blood, a stark reminder of her vulnerability. The knife slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed in the oppressive silence, a symbol of her dwindling hope. She watched it fall, feeling a pang of despair. She fell to her knees, her vision blurring as darkness closed in around her. The world seemed to spin, and she struggled to stay conscious. The shadow's presence grew stronger, feeding off her fear and pain. But even in her darkest moment, Ella refused to give up. She dug deep within herself, finding a spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. She had come too far to surrender now. She reached out, searching for anything she could use to fight back. Her fingers scrabbled across the cold, hard ground, driven by a desperate need to survive. She couldn't let the shadow win. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. Hope surged through her, a small but powerful flame. She grasped the object tightly, feeling its weight and solidity. It was the lantern, its glass glowing with a faint, mystical light. The light seemed to pulse with energy, a beacon of hope in the surrounding darkness. Ella felt a renewed sense of determination. With the lantern in her hand, she knew she had a chance to turn the tide. Sophie woke to the sound of the struggle, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She saw Ella on the ground, the dark figure of shadow looming over her. Without hesitation, Sophie grabbed the lantern from Ella's grasp. The lantern's light grew brighter as Sophie held it aloft, its glow pushing back the darkness. Shadow hissed, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Sophie stepped forward, her small frame radiating courage and determination. The lantern's light seemed to pulse with energy, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Shadow let out a final furious hiss before vanishing into the darkness. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight of fear lifting. The lantern's light filled the room, a warm, comforting glow that banished the lingering shadows. Ella struggled to her feet, her body aching from the fight. She looked at Sophie, her heart swelling with pride and relief. They had faced the darkness together and won, at least for now. Sophie ran to Ella, wrapping her arms around her sister. Ella held her close, the fear and tension of the night melting away in the embrace. The lantern's light continued to shine, a symbol of their victory and their bond. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was enough. They knew the battle wasn't over. The dawn broke over Grey Hollow, the first rays of light piercing through the fog. The town slowly came to life, the oppressive weight of fear lifting, if only for a moment. News of the night's events spread quickly, whispers of the brave sisters and the mysterious lantern that had driven back the darkness. Ella and Sophie were hailed as heroes, their courage a beacon of hope for the frightened townsfolk. But Ella knew the battle was far from over. Shadow was still out there, a malevolent force waiting to strike again. They had won a small victory, but the war against the darkness was just beginning. The lantern became a cherished symbol, a reminder of their triumph and a source of strength.